Dr. Jonathan Collins, political science professor from Brown University, is here to talk about it tonight. Good evening, Dr. Collins. Good to see you.
Good evening, Brittany. Great to see you as well.
And Dr. Collins, first, let's get your take on why this is such an important election day for Americans. And could you talk about what's at stake for Black Americans in their local cities and states?
Well, this is a very critical election for a number of reasons. I think the most important reason is what's at stake with the infrastructure plan. And so, this is not a one-stop shop policy. This is the next step in the continuation of one of the most radical investments in American life that we've seen since the Great Society programs of the 1960s. And so, in order to continue to support, a safety net, support for middle class, support for our kids, allowing the full scope of the infrastructure plan to play out, it depends on the extent to which we see the Biden administration make specific gains during this upcoming election.
Yeah. And what specifically would Black people be looking for? We knew what we were looking for going into the presidential election, but this is the time where sometimes folks say we'll fall off in these other intermediate elections. What specifically would we be looking for?
Well, unfortunately, as always, I think the dignity of Black folks is on the ballot as well. And so what we've seen after the previous election is a very concerted attack on Black voters in a number of different states. So what we've seen is the access to the ballot box has gotten harder and harder to come by. There have been states that have passed a landslide of policies aimed specifically at curbing Black voter turnout. And so, the 2022 midterms will be a test as to whether or not those efforts were effective and whether or not, once again, Black Americans will continue to overcome all of the obstacles that are put in our place when it comes to having the simple, basic right to vote.
Yeah. And Dr. Collins, this is actually the first election post-vaccine distribution. How much do you think the vaccine mandates and stance on vaccines will play a role in these upcoming elections on Tuesday?
I think it should play a pretty sizable role. And so why is that the case, you wonder? It's because vaccine mandates have become extremely politicized. And so if you look on average, you see a little bit more than half of Americans support the vaccine mandates, somewhere between that half of Americans and actually creeping up towards 2/3 of all Americans. But then when you break that support split down by party, then it becomes very clear where the ideas are sort of lying here. So Democrats on average are at least 80% likely to support vaccine mandates, whereas Republicans are about at their peak, maybe about 30% likely to support vaccine mandates. So again, clear partisan divides here. And then it's a matter of, well, which sort of position is going to lead to the most voter turnout at the ballot box? Are we going to see Democrats, folks on the left, mobilize toward the idea of supplanting and maybe even expanding vaccine mandates? Because what we're seeing right now is the Biden administration, despite the lawsuits that were mentioned leading to this segment, the lawsuits themselves, they only target federal employees and federal contractors. This is not some national mandate that affects every single worker. This is something that is very narrow, but is being politicized. So on one side, again, you might see people coming out to defend the right to ensure that we protect workers and that we protect people who are going to work with our federal workers and contractors. But on the other side, you might see a lot of mobilization, people coming out to the ballot box to strike these kinds of mandates down. And so, ultimately we'll see which message delivers the strongest punch.
Yeah, I definitely know all eyes are definitely on that right now. Well, Dr. Collins, I want you to stick around with us. We'll be right back to continue this conversation. And we're back with Dr. Jonathan Collins from Brown University. We've been talking about the upcoming elections on Tuesday. Dr. Collins, thank you for sticking with us here on BNC. So let's talk more about this election. So the Virginia governor's race with Democratic nominee Terry McAuliffe and Republican Glenn Youngkin in this race. Folks are saying what's going on in schools will actually be the issue. How will this impact that race, especially when parents are voters?
This is a very interesting race because, especially for me, I'm a huge fan of novelist Toni Morrison. She was one of my writing inspirations. And so a couple of days ago, I saw that Toni Morrison was trending on Twitter. And I thought, oh, we're paying homage to one of our literary greats. No, Toni Morrison's novel is at the center of the gubernatorial election in Virginia. And so what's happening now is this ongoing debate about quote unquote critical race theory, CRT, this has crept into becoming one of the major issues that could ultimately decide this gubernatorial election. And so this backlash against the use of all kinds of content in our schools around civics curriculum and civics education that try to speak truth to power to the way in which our country has been founded and moved forward. This has become up for discussion, up for political debate. And honestly, now we're seeing it could decide one of the most important statewide offices that we have up for contestation right now. So it's an incredible time.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is one of the things where these parents, we've been hearing it back and forth about critical race theory and their concerns. How big of a role does that play when it comes to deciding the elections in terms of what role parents will play in the classroom?
Well, so it doesn't play as much of a role as you would think. And this is because the issue in and of itself has become hyper politicized. And so naturally, one would expect that because CRT is at the center of this debate, then this might be a election that's decided by how parents and maybe teachers feel about this kind of emerging curriculum. No, what this has become is a battle between Democrats and Republicans. You have Republicans who are essentially latching on to the idea of banning any kind of content that makes white kids feel, quote unquote, uncomfortable. And what we're seeing is Democrats having to essentially refute honestly, the ridiculousness of that claim, and that's where we are. So it's the partisan divide. It has nothing to do, honestly, with what's happening in classrooms and in schools. If you talk to teachers, if you talk to students, if you talk to parents right now, their biggest concerns are navigating schooling with the additional COVID-19 protocols in place, managing issues of learning loss that our students experienced over the past year. It has nothing to do with critical race theory. This is a partisan issue, and is playing itself out that way in this gubernatorial election.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Collins, what do you think are the biggest races to watch? What do you think people are going to be looking at the most, and where?
Well, honestly, I can't take my eyes off of this gubernatorial election in Virginia. Mm-hmm. I think it's extremely important. But then I think we should also be paying attention to some upcoming Senate races in 2022. And so, whether that's, can our good friend Raphael Warnock, my Morehouse brother, can he be reelected in Georgia? Can we see reelection also happen there's going to be an incumbent that's retiring in Pennsylvania. And so this opens up opportunities for the Democrats to gain ground, the Republicans to gain ground. What will we see with some of these Senate races? Arizona is another place to watch. What will we see with these Senate races in some of these swing states that were crucial in determining the outcome for the presidential election in 2020? How will things shape out in those places in 2022?
Mm-hmm. And how important will those seats be to the Biden administration actually getting that agenda complete that he has?
Oh, it's incredibly crucial. Mm-hmm. This is the difference between Biden being able to potentially pass one of the most ambitious policy agendas that we've seen over the last few presidencies versus essentially being a lame duck president who's able to accomplish absolutely nothing outside of issuing executive order. And so what we see in these upcoming elections are incredibly crucial, incredibly critical, and we should all be staying tuned.
Yeah, I definitely know everybody is watching. Like I said, we will have extensive coverage here on BNC come Tuesday because so many people want to know what's happening with these elections. It seems like it's been a very, very important last few years. It's always important, but right now it seems like it's been pretty hot.
Hot indeed, for sure.
Definitely. All right, Dr. Jonathan Collins, thank you so much for joining us here on BNC Live. We will see you next time.